I moved into my first apartment about 2 years ago when I started my new job downtown. It was a decent place, nothing fancy, but it was mine and I could finally have some independence. The building was probably built in the 80s and my unit was on the 3rd floor. Most of my neighbors kept to themselves, which I preferred anyway since I'm not really the type to make small talk in hallways. Everything was pretty normal for the first year and a half. I had my routine down, work during the day, come home, make dinner, watch some Netflix, and go to bed around 11. Weekends were for catching up on sleep and hanging out with friends. It was a simple life, but I was content with it. The weird stuff started happening about 6 months ago, and it always began the same way, with my phone ringing at exactly 2:47 a.m. The first time it happened, I figured it was just a wrong number, or maybe one of my friends drunk dialing me from a bar. But when I answered, there was nothing but silence on the other end. I said hello a few times, waited a bit, then hung up when no one responded. I didn't think much of it until it happened again the next night. Same time, 2:47 a.m. This time I let it ring a few times before answering, thinking maybe they'd hang up and realize they had the wrong number. But when I picked up, again there was just silence. I got a little annoyed and said something like, "Look, you've got the wrong number, stop calling me." But there was still no response. I hung up and went back to sleep. By the 3rd night, I was getting pretty frustrated. I answered the phone, ready to tell whoever it was to stop bothering me, but instead of silence, I heard breathing. It was slow and deliberate, like someone was right there listening to me. I asked who it was and demanded they stop calling, but the breathing just continued. After about 30 seconds, the line went dead. This went on for weeks. Every single night at 2:47 a.m., my phone would ring. Sometimes it was silence, sometimes breathing, and occasionally I'd hear what sounded like shuffling or movement in the background. I tried not answering, but then it would just keep ringing until I either picked up or turned my phone off completely. I started turning my phone off before bed, but then I'd worry about missing important calls or emergencies. I called my phone company to see if they could block the number, but when I checked my call log, it showed that all these calls were coming from my own number. The customer service rep said that was impossible and suggested I might be looking at outgoing calls instead of incoming ones. But I knew what I was seeing. My own number was calling me every night. I mentioned it to a few friends, and they all had logical explanations. Maybe it was a glitch with the phone company, or someone spoofing my number, or maybe I was just stressed from work and not remembering things correctly. I wanted to believe them, but I knew what was happening every night. Things got worse about a month ago. I was lying in bed one night, waiting for the inevitable 2:47 a.m. call, when I heard my ringtone coming from somewhere inside my apartment. But my phone was right there next to me on the nightstand, and it wasn't ringing. The sound was coming from my living room. I got up and followed the noise, and it seemed to be coming from near my couch. I looked around but couldn't find another phone anywhere. The ringing stopped after about a minute, and I went back to bed confused and honestly a little scared. Then at exactly 2:47 a.m., my actual phone rang. When I answered, instead of the usual silence or breathing, I heard my own voice saying, "Why won't you come find me?" The line went dead immediately. I barely slept for the rest of that night. The next day at work, I couldn't concentrate on anything. I kept thinking about hearing my own voice on the phone. I knew it had to be some kind of recording, or maybe someone who sounded similar to me, but it was so clear and distinct that it gave me chills every time I thought about it. Last week, things escalated even more. The unknown ringtone in my living room started happening every night around midnight, always in a different location. Sometimes it would sound like it was coming from the kitchen, sometimes from near the front door, sometimes from the bathroom. I'd search everywhere but never found the source. Then, 3 nights ago, I woke up to find my phone missing from my nightstand. I searched my entire apartment but couldn't find it anywhere. At 2:47 a.m., I heard it ringing from inside my bedroom closet. When I opened the closet door, my phone was sitting on the floor in the back corner, ringing and displaying my own number as the caller. I haven't been sleeping well since then. Every night I hear that unknown ringing from different parts of my apartment, and every night at 2:47 a.m., my phone calls itself from impossible locations. I've started staying at friends' places on weekends, but even there, the calls follow me. I don't know what's happening to me, and I'm honestly scared to find out. I've always been pretty rational about things that can't be explained. My first instinct is usually to find a logical reason for whatever's happening, and most of the time I can. But there's this one thing that's been going on for the past few months that I honestly can't make sense of, no matter how hard I try to reason with myself. It started back in February when I was living with my girlfriend Sarah in our apartment downtown. We'd been together for about 2 years and had just moved in together the previous fall. Everything was going pretty well between us, and I was happy with how our relationship was progressing. We both worked different schedules. She had a regular 9-to-5 office job, while I worked evenings at a restaurant, so I'd usually get home around midnight when she was already asleep. The first time it happened, I was in the kitchen making myself a late dinner after getting home from work. Sarah was upstairs sleeping, and the apartment was quiet except for the sound of me moving around downstairs. I was standing at the stove when I clearly heard Sarah call my name from the living room behind me. It wasn't loud or urgent, just a normal, "Hey Jake," like she wanted to ask me something. I turned around, expecting to see her standing there, but the living room was empty. I figured maybe she had called down from upstairs and the sound just carried weird in the apartment, so I called back up to her, asking what she needed. But there was no response. I went upstairs to check on her, and she was sound asleep in bed. She didn't wake up when I walked in, and she was clearly in that deep sleep where she hadn't moved in hours. I just shrugged it off and figured I was more tired than I thought after a long shift at work. But then it happened again a few nights later. This time I was watching TV in the living room when I heard Sarah's voice coming from the kitchen saying, "Can you come here for a sec?" I muted the TV and called back, asking what she needed, but again there was no response. When I got up to check, the kitchen was empty, and Sarah was still upstairs in bed, fast asleep. Over the next couple weeks, this kept happening maybe once or twice a week, always when Sarah was asleep upstairs, and always just her voice calling my name or asking me to come somewhere. I started to worry that maybe I was having some kind of stress-related hallucinations. Work had been pretty demanding lately, and I hadn't been sleeping great either. I decided to mention it to Sarah one morning over coffee. I explained what had been happening and asked if she'd been getting up during the night without remembering, or if maybe she talks in her sleep loud enough for me to hear downstairs. She looked at me kind of strangely and said she'd never gotten up during the night and that she doesn't talk in her sleep as far as she knows. But then she got quiet for a minute before telling me something that made my stomach drop. She said that for the past month or so, she'd been hearing my voice calling her name when I wasn't home yet. She'd be upstairs getting ready for bed around 11, and she'd hear me downstairs saying her name or asking where she was. She'd call back down to me, but when she didn't get a response, she'd assume I was just busy with something. but then when I'd actually get home an hour later, she'd realize I hadn't been there when she heard my voice. We both kind of stared at each other after that conversation, not really knowing what to make of it. Neither of us wanted to say what we were both probably thinking, that something really weird was going on that we couldn't explain. After we talked about it, things seemed to quiet down for about a week. I didn't hear Sarah's voice when she wasn't there, and she didn't hear mine either. I thought maybe talking about it had somehow made it stop, like our minds had been playing tricks on us, and acknowledging it broke whatever was happening. But then last month, something happened that I still can't get out of my head. I was home alone on a Saturday afternoon while Sarah was at work. I was in the basement doing laundry when I heard Sarah upstairs calling my name. Not just once, but multiple times, getting louder each time, like she was looking for me, and getting frustrated that I wasn't answering. I called back up that I was in the basement, but the calling continued. I could hear her walking around upstairs, her footsteps moving from room to room as she kept calling my name. I started getting annoyed because it seemed like she wasn't listening to me, so I dropped what I was doing and went upstairs to see what was so important. But when I got to the main floor, the apartment was completely empty. I checked every room, calling Sarah's name, but she wasn't there. I looked out the window and her car wasn't in the parking lot. I grabbed my phone and called her, and she answered from her office, asking why I was calling during her workday. I told her what had just happened, and she went quiet for a long time before saying she was coming home early. When she got back about an hour later, she looked really shaken up. She said that while she was at work, around the same time I heard her voice at home, she kept hearing me calling her name from different parts of her office building. Her co-workers didn't hear anything, and she knew I was at home, but she couldn't shake the feeling that I was there looking for her. We spent that whole evening trying to figure out what was happening to us. We considered everything: stress, lack of sleep, some kind of shared psychological thing, maybe even a gas leak in the apartment affecting our minds, but nothing made complete sense. It's been a few weeks since that Saturday, and we haven't heard each other's voices when we're not around. But we're both on edge now, waiting for it to start again. We've talked about moving to a different apartment, but part of me wonders if whatever this is would just follow us wherever we go. I don't really know what to believe anymore, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to find out what's really happening. This happened about 4 years ago, during the summer of 2021. My buddy Marcus, who I've known since high school, invited me to go camping at this state park about 3 hours north of where we live. I wasn't really in the mood for camping, but I'd been dealing with a lot of stress from work and figured getting away from everything for a weekend might do me some good. We drove up on a Friday afternoon and found a decent campsite that was pretty isolated from the other campers. The site was surrounded by thick woods on 3 sides with just a small clearing where we could set up our tents. There was a fire pit in the center and a picnic table that had definitely seen better days. Marcus had been to this park before with his dad when he was younger, so he knew his way around pretty well. After we got everything set up, we decided to explore the area a bit before it got dark. About half a mile into the woods, we came across this old trail that wasn't marked on any of the park maps. Marcus thought it might lead to a scenic overlook or maybe an old ranger station, so we decided to follow it. The trail was overgrown and hadn't been maintained in years, but it was still clearly a path that people had used at some point. We walked for maybe 20 minutes before the trail opened up into a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was what looked like the foundation of an old building, just concrete blocks arranged in a rectangle with some rusted metal beams scattered around. There were also several wooden posts sticking up from the ground in a pattern that didn't make much sense to either of us. Marcus started poking around the ruins while I stayed near the edge of the clearing. Something about the place made me uncomfortable, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. The woods around the clearing were completely silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Even the wind seemed to die down whenever we talked. As we were getting ready to head back to our campsite, I noticed something weird. There were what looked like large scratches or claw marks carved deep into several of the trees around the clearing. They were too high up and too deep to be from any animal I could think of, and they looked fresh despite the abandoned feel of the place. Marcus saw them too, and suggested we should probably head back before it got too dark to find our way. Neither of us said it out loud, but I could tell he was getting the same uneasy feeling I was having about the place. We made it back to our campsite just as the sun was setting. We built a fire and made some dinner, but both of us were quieter than usual. I kept thinking about those scratches on the trees and wondering what could have made marks like that. Around 11 p.m., we were sitting by the fire talking about work and catching up on things when Marcus suddenly stopped mid-sentence and looked past me into the woods behind our campsite. When I asked him what was wrong, he said he thought he saw someone standing between the trees, just watching us. I turned around to look, but I didn't see anything except darkness. Marcus insisted that there had been a tall figure standing about 30 feet back in the woods, completely motionless. We grabbed our flashlights and shined them into the trees, but there was nothing there. We decided to call it a night and went to our respective tents. I had trouble falling asleep because I kept hearing what sounded like footsteps circling our campsite. Every time I'd listen closely, the sounds would stop, but as soon as I'd start to drift off, they'd start again. I must have finally fallen asleep around 2 a.m., but I woke up a few hours later to the sound of Marcus unzipping his tent. I called over to ask if everything was okay, and he whispered back that he needed to use the bathroom but didn't want to go alone. I grabbed my flashlight and went with him to the designated area about 50 yards from our campsite. As we were walking back, Marcus grabbed my arm and pointed toward the woods near where we'd entered the clearing earlier that day. Standing at the tree line was a tall, dark figure. It was too far away and too dark to make out any details, but it was definitely human-shaped and completely still. We both stood there staring at it for what felt like forever, neither of us wanting to move or make any noise. The figure never moved either, just stood there like it was watching us. After maybe 5 minutes, Marcus whispered that we should get back to our tents. We quickly walked back to our campsite, looking over our shoulders the whole way. The figure never moved from its spot at the tree line. Once we got back to our tents, I suggested we should pack up and leave, but Marcus said we should wait until morning, since driving those winding mountain roads in the dark probably wasn't the safest idea. I barely slept for the rest of the night. Every time I'd close my eyes, I'd hear those footsteps again, sometimes close to my tent, sometimes further away. A few times I heard what sounded like someone or something moving through the bushes just outside the campsite. When the sun finally came up, we packed our stuff as quickly as possible and got out of there. As we were loading the last of our gear into Marcus's truck, I looked back toward the woods one more time. Standing in the exact same spot as the night before was that same tall figure, still completely motionless, still watching us. We drove straight home without stopping, and neither of us talked much during the 3-hour drive. It's been 4 years since that camping trip, and Marcus and I still hang out regularly, but we've never talked about what we saw that weekend. We've also never gone camping together again. I don't know if what we encountered was some kind of person living in those woods, or something else entirely, but I have no interest in finding out.